Well, hello, and welcome back to another video of mine. I'm filming quite late in the day. It gets dark by like 4:45, which is terrible for me because I stay up late and I sleep in sometimes. But I am very excited to finally be sitting down to film my theological discussions video. I still haven't posted the last video, so I'll probably do that tonight and then have this one go up probably like Thursday or something like that. So you guys will get 2 videos in 1 week because I have been lagging lately. I don't really have a plan for today. I really like this framing and setup, by the way. I know like the tree's kind of going on in my head, but I just took a shower and got ready specifically because I knew I wanted to film a video today. Mondays are like my most chill days. It kind of feels like my weekend, to be honest, where I can just kind of like do chores and like do things around the house and relax. But yeah, I don't really know what I'm going to talk about or where God is going to lead me in this conversation. But my hope and prayer is that it is edifying to you, that you learn something new, keep your mind open, and that we can just have a fun chat. So I think I want to talk about the end times, which is always super fun. So I'm pretty sure that's called eschatology, but I could be wrong. I think it's eschatology, and then ecclesiology is church theology stuff. So eschatology is the study of the end times, and there is 3 predominant viewpoints. There is pre-mill, all-mill, and post-mill. I grew up with the pre-mill dispensational viewpoint, pre-trib rapture type of theology, and I didn't really know about post-trib or post-mill, not post-trib. I didn't really know about post-mill until probably like 2 years ago, 3 years ago. So that was pretty new to me. Hearing about it was like, what? People think the world's getting better, because that's not what I grew up hearing. Just felt very radical to me. And then all-mill was just kind of this like thing that I didn't know anyone who was all-mill. I didn't even know that thing existed. But the church I go to now is all-mill, so it's really opened up my eyes a lot more to that theology. We just went through the book of Revelation last year. It took us like 9 months to get through it, to really like deep dive study in it. First time I'd ever done that with the book of Revelation. It was always this like scary book that I didn't want to touch, or not even like scary, but just very complicated. That's what everyone was always like. It's such a complicated book to read into and to understand, so just don't touch it. Leave that to the theologians. But it was a really encouraging book because it's really about the revelation of Jesus, and as a Christian that gives us a lot of hope for what's to come. It shouldn't be this like scary thing. And yeah, there's a lot of like imagery and metaphors and figurative language, and some people think it's very literal and some people think it's very figurative, and some people kind of take like a balanced approach. But yeah, so it's just, there's a lot of weird stuff in the book. And I understand why certain people take certain approaches. Some people are like, God's like being literal, like he wouldn't put this in his book if he didn't mean it. But then also understanding like the Jewish writing style and the context of the time, very like allegorical type of writing. So I see both points of view, and that's why I actually had a wonderful theological discussion with this guy named Trinity that I met at a coffee shop, and he kind of explained these types of things as like, it's a mountain, but sometimes mountains are like multiple mountains, but it's still referred to as one mountain. So you can have the one peak of pre-mill, the one peak of all-mill, and the one peak of post-mill, but they're still the same mountain. And some people like to plant themselves on one peak without like really zooming out and seeing that they're all the same mountain still. And I really like that way of describing it, because I think I kind of live on all the mountain ranges, and I don't just like stick to one peak and like plant myself there, especially because I know that there's still so much more to learn and understand, that I like to keep an open mind with theology stuff. So yeah, I kind of like teeter-totter on multiple things, but right now currently I kind of sit between, and this might not make sense, but I kind of sit between the pre-mill and the all-mill is like the 2 viable options, and I don't really see post-mill as a viable option, although I know that all-mill and post-mill have a lot in common. That's just kind of where I'm at right now. I see validation in both. But I think what also stirs me away from the pre-mill, like dispensational look at things is being introduced to covenant theology. And this is what I really dislike about the American church, is I think they do a really bad job of presenting to their believers the multiple different viewpoints on theology and letting people come to their own discernment and their own conclusion. Instead, they present it as like, this is the way, this is the truth, this is the life, and you can only come to Christ through this theological viewpoint. And I'm just like, what? That is not how this works. So I really appreciate the fact that the Bible I read, the study Bible I have, has like some Christians think this, some Christians think that. And I really enjoy when other believers can be like, yeah, some people think this and some people think that. This is why I think this, but I can see why they think that, but I'm still leaning more to this side because of X, Y, and Z. I appreciate that approach to theological topics rather than this is it, because that just seems very prideful and arrogant. Like, you're not God, you don't know for sure. And if they have scripture to back things up and their understanding of God in the Bible, and you do as well, like, who's to say who is right and wrong? You know? So that's kind of how I approach it. I know not everyone approaches it like that, but I have just grown a lot in this past year, and I used to think one way, and now I think a different way on a lot of different topics. And it would be foolish of me to be like, oh, well, everyone in this camp, when I was in this camp, is just like super off base with it. So that's kind of where I stand with eschatology. I definitely, I see how things could be getting worse, but I also see how, like, we've just been constantly living in a tribulation since Jesus ascended into heaven. And I see both perspectives. I can see why we would think we're in the end times, but then I also look at history and I see that everyone thought they were in the end times. And so it's easy to think like, oh, America in this central, time in history is so important. And, it's just like, are we though? Like, are we the new Babylon? Are we not? Are we going to like read into all this symbolism and like the government and the money and society? I don't know. I mean, I definitely see how a lot of things are being primed for a one world government and things like that could have happened in the past. And we're having like more and more technology and things like that and a lot more deception. So I definitely see that aspect of it. But then at the same time, I see that like people in the biblical times, when Paul was writing this and John was writing their letters to the church and John was writing Revelation, they thought this was it. They thought they were the end times generation. So it's just, it's hard because like we can think we're like the center of the universe and this time in history and everything's culminating to this point and we're in the end times and Jesus can come back like in our lifetime, but that might not be the case. And so that's just kind of where I'm at with it, holding things very loosely in my hands. Now with the dispensational and covenant theology. So, again, never heard of covenant theology, which is just crazy to me because God makes covenants with his people. So, like, why don't we have covenant theology in most of our churches? It's just mind-boggling to me. But I really appreciate covenant theology. It explains a lot to me. I never thought Israel in the New Testament was talking about like the literal nation of Israel. I always like assumed and read it as talking about his chosen people, like believers, God's children. So covenant theology makes a lot more sense to me. But I also see how there's different dispensations, meaning that there's like different periods of time in history. But I think that's why I like the whole mountain range thing, because it's like it's all the same mountain range. There's just different peaks, and it's like okay to like explore all the peaks and like go in between them and not just like plant yourself, because then you're getting such a narrow viewpoint in my opinion, and you're missing out on like the full depth and breadth, like the full magnificent picture of who God is and how he relates to his people. So I go to a church now that does infant baptism, which is crazy to me because literally in high school or even early college, if you told me that I'd be going to a church with infant baptism, I'd be like, you're crazy. I'd be like, you're insane. I would have never, because it was always such this like, like terrible thing that Christians did. It's like it's like the papists or the Catholics, I learned that new word, thank you Trinity, who do infant baptism and like some weird sects of, you know, Protestant Christianity. But yeah, I see things so much more clearly now, because I see my old churches that I went to do baby dedications, and I'm like, to me a baby dedication is just a watered down baptism of an infant. LOL, watered down. But because they're saying almost the exact same thing, pretty much word for word, the exact same thing that happens at a baby dedication happens at an infant baptism. But the only difference is that water is poured on them, having them enter into the covenant. That's why I feel like baby dedication is just watered down infant baptism. I'm like, if you're going to do a baby dedication, just do infant baptism and bring in the covenant theology. Like, it makes it so much more beautiful and holistic to the Bible and what you're trying to do and say. And I know the reason why they do baby dedication instead of infant baptism is because literally the water like scares people. It like freaks people out, which I'm just like, you're literally doing an infant baptism, except you're watering down the theology to your congregants because you're not talking about covenant theology and how God has covenants with his people. You're getting me heated now. But yeah, so we'll move on from that. I'm not going to try to like do an in-depth dive on every single topic because you can do your own research. I want to introduce different theological discussions to you, and you can do your own research and figure things out for yourself. I'm not going to try to convince you, although my passion for the different topics obviously will come out. Okay, so now we are going to talk about King James only. Another topic that I saw from afar on the interweb of people being like, King James only, and I would just see it in YouTube comments on different theological videos, but I never actually met someone in real life who was actually King James only until recently. Shout out to Trinity and Stephen. Yeah, I again was never presented this topic, and that's what's so funny to me. It's because, like, for you to get outside of your little theological bubble of the church that you grew up in, you have to do your own research and talk to other believers outside your church, because if you just stay in your little theological bubble, then like you're not going to grow. And that's what makes me so sad, is because so many people just stay in their little theological bubbles, and then they think this is, again, the way, the truth, and the life, and no one can come to the Father except through this theological issue. And you have such a narrow-minded view on who Jesus is and who God is and who the overall church is because of that. And so I really appreciate talking to people who are King James only. And yes, some of them are very intense with how they present their topic, and I think that's why they kind of get a bad rep, is because they don't really know how to present it to other Bible-believing Christians who want to follow and serve the Lord in a way that is palatable to them and it is offered in grace and truth. Because the truth of the matter is, if someone never ever heard of the King James only, you know, and they grew up with like ESV or NIV or, you know, some other translation, the whole King James only thing to them is going to sound really foreign and kind of like discrediting their like whole faith and walk with the Lord. So I would just present it very lightly, just kind of like throw it out there, sprinkle some information, plant some seeds, and let the Holy Spirit do the convicting, okay? You're not this like beacon of hope, because again, anyone can fall in the camp of this is the way, this is the truth, this is the life, and no one can come to the Father except through this theological stance, which is just very off-putting and not true. So, yeah, I am definitely not in that camp. Sorry for the peeps watching this that wish I was. But it has opened my eyes to different translations and kind of just, again, broadened my horizons and deepened and gave me more breadth to the conversation at hand, which I really appreciate. And I will explore it more. I grew up with NIV, and ESV even is very new to me and something that I'm slowly dipping my feet in. So I'm definitely going to dip my feet in ESV before I dip my feet in King James, and I'm okay with that. And that is just the journey that I'm going on. And everyone's journey with convictions and their like sanctification and just knowledge of who God is grows and changes over time. Again, me 3 years ago was sitting in the pre-mill dispensational camp, and now I'm sitting in like the covenant theology a millennial camp. And then maybe I'll sit in the post-mill camp for one time. The thing is I don't take any of this stuff to the gospel level. So to me, it's all fun. Theology is fun. And I can see why certain Christians lean one way or the other, but I don't like to put it as like something to divide people over. And it's like, well, if you think this, then we don't want to associate with you because our theology is different. And I'm just like, really? That's sad. So now we're going to talk about one of the most controversial topics, which is the sign gifts. I don't know if I mentioned this on my channel already. I may have mentioned it briefly, but the whole continuationist versus cessationist, the whole charismatic thing is very, very widely discussed in the Christian sphere, and people don't associate with each other if they're in one camp or the other. Like, I personally have grown up mostly with a lot of cessationists and minor continuationists, but I have not grown up with charismatics. Like, I personally don't have friends that I know of that would consider themselves charismatic. I do have a lot of friends that consider themselves cessationists, and even more so, most of my friends are minor continuationists. I would say that's where most Christians stand from my perspective, of at least who I know in my life, but that's just my perspective. Obviously, you may have a different one, but I see this as something that really, really gets to people because of what I was talking about. When charismatics say, this is the way, this is the truth, this is the life, and no one can come to the Father except through this theological viewpoint of having charismatic sign gift traits with the Holy Spirit is like an outward demonstration of whether you're a Christian or not. Kind of dicey. But I also see the cessationists go to the other extreme and say that if you have charismatic sign gifts, then you're blasphemous and you're a heretic following Satan, pretty much. So I think that there is a middle ground, and that is where I like to stand. I think that God does still use his people to perform signs and miracles when necessary. Now, whether it's a gift that you have or not, kind of debatable. I do think some people do have prophetic word. I've met people who do. And what is also really interesting is I would like to beg this as an argument. I don't know what I'm trying to say. I would like to offer this argument as a hypothesis, not as a stance that I'm taking, but a question I'm posing, that maybe we as a body of believers would have more sign gifts if we were open to them and knew how to practice them. I don't know. That's kind of some weird hypothesis, but what I'm just trying to say is that no, I don't know. It's a very interesting topic. I've heard testimonies of people having God tell them certain things about people, and it's just like, how did they know? Or like being able to speak in tongues. It's like, that is clearly from the Lord. But then when you try to blasphemize it and like make it for your own glory and very hyper spiritualize it, that's when it can get real bad and false prophecy. And obviously Mark talks about that. I just read that today in Mark 13, is to look out for false prophets and false signs and wonders. So I think we should be on guard with those things, because not everyone who claims the name of Jesus is saved. And some people are a wolf in sheep clothing, just using the gospel for their own benefit and glory. So just something to be concerned about with that regard. I think that it can get really twisted real easily. I know the sign gifts gets real twisted, because it's like, would the hyper charismatics think I am a Christian or my friends are Christians because they don't have those outward displays? Like, that's a little weird. I want to agree with that theologically. And same with the whole baptism thing with like the Church of Christ and stuff like that, where they think that you have to be baptized to be saved. It's like, it's when you put things that are secondary or even tertiary issues and you bring that to gospel level salvation, that's when it gets like not okay, in my opinion, which I think is sad because I know a lot of people do that, and that's when you get into some weird stuff. So we talked about a lot of theological stuff. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that is a very controversial theological topic. I think that there is a balance between reading into the context of that society and translating it into modern times. And that goes with a lot of different things, like hair covering for women, that goes for a woman's role in the church, that goes for the whole homosexuality thing, just tattoos, just like a list and lists and lists and lists of things where people either read not enough into the historical context or they read too much. And again, I think there's a balance, and you have to look at the Bible as a whole, and you have to look at the heart of it. And I think when you look at the Bible as a whole, of who God is and what he says, not just in this one tiny verse context, but in an overall breadth of the whole Bible, and then you look at how he views sin and what he describes as sin, and then you look at your heart and you check that, then I think things become a lot clearer. So yeah, it's just really sad to see so many people compromising on whatever our culture is now saying and just kind of letting things be willy-nilly. But then it's also really sad to see some churches go super hyper-legalistic and take so many things very literally from the Bible that were clearly in a cultural context of things, because Paul is writing to very specific people in a very specific context to their culture. And so we can't just take that and apply it and squeeze it into our culture. Because yes, there's some universal truths of human nature and that we are sinful, but not every single thing applies to every single context. And that's why I think it's important to look at things in a holistic sense and not in a very narrow-minded sense. So that's what I'm going to say on that. I've been talking for 22 minutes, and obviously I could keep rambling on because I love talking about this. It is getting dark and I am kind of cold, so I'm going to go now. If you want a part 2 in the future, leave down some things below that I did not talk about theological wise that you would like me to touch on, and I will do my best to open up the discussion. So yeah, tell me your opinion on all the different theological stuff that I mentioned. I look forward to reading it. And I hope you have a great day, and I will see you next time, probably in 2022, which is crazy. But maybe not. Maybe I'll see you before then. But if I don't, then I'll see you next year. Bye, guys.